Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for being here. I know it's lunchtime for some of us. Let's resist. We have an interesting topic for all of you today. So very happy to present the panelists that will be with me on this small journey today, but very attractive. So let me present here on my left Frederique De Laat. Please a big applause for her. Thank you. Thank you. As you can see on the screen, Frederique is the co-founder of Brandlead. Basically, she's a strategic expert in sport marketing, and she's doing it also, but we will speak about that very interesting topics in my city as well, in Napoli, with some club that I support, we can say. And she's specializing in helping clubs and athletes unlock the commercial power into the women's football, which is a very kind of new thing. So we're going to go discussing in a bit. Then I have Bianca, Bianca Rech from Bayern Munich, the sport director. Please, a big applause, not even for supporters of Bayern Munich. And Bianca is one that is leading the change into the women's game at the beginning on the pitch. Then after, and I have to say, we don't have any deal in common on that. So I'm telling you this for real. I really care on what you are doing, and we all say a big thank for what you are doing on the pitch for Bayern and for the female football. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And then I will finish last but not least with Kirsten Sibbit Johnston, which is the director at the sport consultancy. So Kirsten, please a big applause for Kirsten as well. Kirsten is treating also a very interesting topic today. She's a leading advisor on investment, strategy and governance in the sports industry. And so you're doing a massive job to make the industry grow. Thanks for it. So let's go with the first question. I think we have, there is no time, but I think we have, we will try to be as quick as possible. So first question for, I will start with you on my left, Frederique. You in Brandlead, you have a unique vision that you advocate that female football, women's football has to be treated not as an extension of the male football, which is a battle we are all fighting since years. What are the unique values you think now the brands are finally starting recognizing into the female industry?
Yeah, good question. Do you also need an introduction, or?
No, thanks. I will.
Okay.
By myself, I am the CEO and the founder of Tedeschi and Partners, women football agency. I mean, we are based in different countries in Europe and in the US. And thanks for this small assist you made.
Of course. I think what we see in women's football, it's a completely different fan demographics. So I think that's very interesting for brands. If you now look at the demographics of men's football, and I don't want to compare too much, but it's mostly older men, and in women's football, it's really young girls, young families, a lot of Gen Z. And I think for brands, that's really interesting to tap into more, because I think you always want to be as soon, like at the beginning of the consumer. You know, you want to be targeting the young consumer, so you have them for life. I would say. You know, I gave an example. For example, if you're a bank, you have a bank account. For example, if you start at 8 years old, you never change. So I think that's really interesting for brands to tap into, and for football clubs, that's interesting as well to see how to get incremental fans in that category. So completely new fan base, but that also means a completely new strategy.
So create a legacy basically with the new fan base. Yes,
exactly.
Thanks for it. Bianca, I took some notes yesterday when my flight was delayed of 7 hours, and I was thinking on you on that question. I've put the note structural integration. So basically, you with Bayern Munich, you of course have a long history of success in football, women's football, and we can say you are with your club one of the pioneers in Germany, but in Europe with the female football. One question: how is the structural integration between the men's, the women's, the youth that can help having a grow in the commercialization of the brand of Bayern?
Well, I think we're in a good position because, I mean, Bayern Munich is a huge brand in Europe, so that helps from the beginning. But with the history of women's football at Bayern, I think we kind of grown our own brand, let's say. And I mean, the good thing is we use as well in social media, for example, we use both channels, but we also have our own channels. So it's important that we, let's say, play on both channels. And I mean, it's the brand. In the end, we have a long history, over 50 years. We have grown our own department, our own direction, let's say, our own strategy. I think this is important to not be the same. But on the other hand, using the structure of the club, especially in marketing, media, sales, these are all like parts we're using in our house as well.
Yes, thanks. I completely agree, and also now, I mean, I think we are all living in a moment, in an era where women's football is not anymore like, you know, fully crowded of words like is a potential, is a future, it's something that like the title suggests, it's becoming a global business now. So thanks for it, Bianca. Kirsten, a question to you. I promise that was not thought on the airport as well. It came before. Because of course on what you are doing, you are clearly helping businesses in you know, creating business cases for investors. Now we can say, okay, let's enter into a practical approach, because what is the currently, we can say, the main issue that is stopping the large scale capital in investing in women's football?
It's a good question, and I think there's probably not one thing, but a number of things. I think, you know, it's interesting listening to what Frederique and Bianca were saying, because we, working in women's football, see that there is a growing evidence base that there are fans, that those fans are spending money, that the engagement with women's football is growing. That isn't necessarily translating into the stable recurring revenues that private equity investors look for. So there's, I think, this interesting tension where there is more capital that is being tagged to women's sport, and within women's sport, women's football is by far the largest, most mature part of the sector, and therefore investment conversations inevitably come round to football because that is where there is most opportunity to spend. I think there's a couple of challenges. One is that a lot of that capital is coming from the US, and we all know the US model for football, for soccer, NWSL, is a closed league. It's a very different investment environment. And even some of the investors that I talk to that are invested in US clubs really struggle with looking at European investments. I think, and the things that are challenges, one is the lack of, I think, underpinning media rights revenue. US investors expect that and see that, and that isn't necessarily present in any of the European leagues yet, let's be honest. And there is no confidence necessarily that those revenues are going to grow. I think they struggle with lack of control. They're not involved in the same way in the central body, and there are fewer revenue streams that a club has ownership of and is able to leverage. I think there are challenges around proof of revenue, where the revenues of the club are sitting together, men's and women's, and I don't think there's necessarily a clear view and an honest view of how those women's revenues are being allocated. I think there is also a challenge, and the things I'm hearing is, well, is women's football really going to grow? Is it really going to grow in Europe? Is it really going to be monetized in the same way that we're able to do in the US? And I think there's a lot of skepticism, even amongst women's sport advocates, which is the bit that really concerns me the most. And I suppose the final point I'd make is around structure, the structural opportunity around investment. I think there's a really important matching process around the investor and the club, and they have to find the right club that is going to be and give them that commercial growth potential. The clubs that have the most potential and have the most current revenue are the ones that arguably don't really want to bring in, or certainly don't want to give away a majority of their share of that women's club, because they've invested in it, because they're growing it. The ones that don't have as much potential are the ones that might want to give away more. So I think finding that balance where you think the club has that unique potential to grow, but also there is enough capital on the table, there's enough share for you to say, we can really own and operate this, or we can, even if you don't want to own and operate, the investors still want to have control and influence. Because, I mean, you guys will see, and you could tell me, Bianca, if you don't agree, I think for women's football to really achieve its potential, there needs to be a significant degree of separation in the governance and ownership on the women's team and the men's team. And if the investor can't see that, I think it's a much different investment proposition.
Bianca, you want to comment? I was saying.
Yeah, I think in Germany you have a different discussions around bringing in investors, but I think agree on this point. We are having these discussions as well, talking about the possibilities, especially when you look at the US or you look at the UK, where like private investors coming in and bringing as well a lot of money. So that changed the market, that changed the competition. It's going to be much harder for us, even especially in Germany, to be at the same level. So that's why we have to think in the future, we have to think about different financial models, different, let's say, separation and structures. And that's something, especially in Germany, we need to think of.
Frederique, you wanted to add something. I was seeing you like moving the mic.
Just very agreeing, but yeah, I agree, and I think I agree everything what you guys said, and I think it's interesting to see, because sometimes they also do it for financial reasons, to sell the women's side, I guess, because then they overcross something with the transfers. So then but that's also kind of hard if you don't have two P&Ls separately. Then, you know, if you is playing in the stadium, is the women's team then allowed to play again in the stadium, and you have to rent it now all of a sudden? So there also comes with a lot of extra cost, I think. And I think separating the two is a challenge, but I think it's a success for growth in the future for sure. Yeah.
Okay, then I have an extra question. Then after all of this, about so you can prepare the answer about, you see the Brighton, which is literally building a stadium for. Let's discuss later. So, Frederique, I will stay with you, because you stated that the women's sport is the future now of, we can say, of marketing. I will add even the present right now. But how can brands move on from a proposed lead, like a theoretical or symbolic sponsorships, to then creating a partnership that can deliver a real ROI or something adding value to the club?
Yeah, good question. I think it's for sure moving away from just putting your logo on there and giving some money, but really thinking how to grow the game, I would say. I think where we see where the most value is made, if you're really tapping into, okay, which club am I sponsoring, and how can I find, for example, if we're looking at the women's team, certain players, for example, that are maybe connected to what I am doing as a company as well. So, for example, I think many of those players have, for example, pets, or I don't know. But like for a pet company, then it's interesting to come into that space and then using the players because they already have a love for, I don't know, pets, and maybe you're a pet food supplier, I would say. So I think there is a big opportunity to really also diving into the more storytelling side and less of the just putting your brand out there, because the people who are in the stadium it's not as big yet as the men's side. So if you want to get real value for money, then you're looking more in the storytelling side and the PR value around it. And we've seen that that's really helping brands grow. And I think you get a really positive association if you see a brand that really understands women's football. I think one of my biggest, I love the campaign of Arsenal and Purcell, for example, where they really tap into it's okay to be dirty, for example, and have stains on your clothes, because that women can also have that, and they really understand the troubles little girls are getting into, because they were afraid of, like, maybe it doesn't really suit me football because I don't want to get dirty, or for example. So I think understanding the women's game, understanding what the players can offer, and then seeing where your brand can help grow the game, but then also your consumer get a really, I don't know, a happy feeling from what you're doing. So
I agree, completely agree. On that side, I will jump with Bianca. I will keep it from a long distance. I mean, we all know you are living, I think, a high value of pressure in a big club, you know, like Bayern is. I was always curious, and now we all see that on the male side, clubs are suffering for financial issues. We can say even unexpected big names of clubs. I remember when I was a child, a club like Valencia was to me, you know, every time competing Champions League, and now you see they're struggling and trying to sell the club. Now, so we see that the model from the male side, I don't want to say it's not successful, but maybe it's not sustainable. So how you in a club like Bayern will or try to balance the need of having results, immediately results on the pitch. You compete in the league and you have to win the league. You won the league this year, or competing in Champions League to try to be successful, and on the same time trying to having, you know, a long-term sustainable plan for the club.
I mean, first of all, I'm happy to be at Bayern Munich because in men's football, I think is the most healthiest club in the world, let's say. So that's a good thing, to be honest. That's why I think you mentioned it. We probably don't have to be scared about that they get rid of us because we're too expensive. No, but sure. I mean, at Bayern Munich, and it's everywhere in the world. If you speak to Arsenal, if you play in a club like them, it's about being successful. The competition is hard, as I said before, especially when you go to Champions League semi-final and you see the Lyons or you see the whatever Chelsea's, Barcelona's, where you know their budget is much bigger than ours. But on the other way, you know where the money is coming from, which is, we talk about private investors. It's a different model. So I think for us, it's a challenge to be competitive in the future, 100%. But on the other hand, I think it's important to find, let's say, a middle way. First of all, still to attract international top high quality players. But on the other hand, focusing a lot, and that's, I think it's a general thing we need to all focus as clubs, to develop youth. Because the amount of quality players is so less for the clubs who are investing so much money. So for us, it's really important to focus much more on the youth and the academy to develop youth players. So, and I think here, as Bayern Munich, it's an opportunity, and that's what we need to face to find, let's say, a middle way of being sustainable, but also being competitive. So that would be probably the answer.
I agree. No, I agree with you, Bianca. But so, do you think that an help can arrive from federations, like internally, for example, putting some rule that can, you know, I don't want to say oblige, but, you know, almost impose to have a certain number of youth players that go playing, I know, regularly into the senior team, not only being only on the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you have it in Champions League. You have to be, you have to have the young players, the homegrown players in your squad. But yes, I think it's something. Sometimes we need to think a bit different in women's football, and that's why we think we have to think about different rules. And I think it could be an option to think about, like an obligation. You have to put, or even you get maybe money for like bringing younger players into the first team squad if they get more minutes. That's kind of a benefit for the clubs. They're doing it. I think this could be a way instead of saying it's an obligation that you have to play them. So then you still can choose what the way is. But I think it's something, especially for clubs who are taking care of development of young players, if they benefit on it as well.
Yeah, I was thinking on that. Just it came up in my mind because as an Italian, you know that in Italy on the male side, it's like 12 years we're not qualifying in World Cup, and I've read some interesting article that was just suggesting. This journalist, he's a famous journalist in Italy, was suggesting to create, like sort of obligation, like you were mentioning, because we are lacking of young players that are going to go playing and having minutes. They are on the list, but they are not even then earning minutes. And this is not happening in the female side of the Italian national team. Why? Because, I mean, the oldest one we have are 34, 35, 36 years old, but then we have a huge variety of young players that are the new generations that are coming that before doesn't exist. So that's why I was thinking, and thanks for answering to that. I will go to you again, Kirsten. So I have a question regarding the governance and I say professionalization. So basically, as revenues continue to climb, we see that in the female industry, we are having increasing revenues. Every year is a record breaking for something regarding the female side, the commercial side of it. How crucial is to now reform the structures within clubs and leagues and federation, I say, to support these important growth arriving to a global business?
I think it's critical, and I think that's true on both league and club level. I think you're almost seeing now it's reaching a point where revenues have been able to grow and give enough confidence that there is growth potential and there is a runway. But in order to really optimize that growth, I think there needs to be a greater degree of focus and to some extent separation in the governance and operations of women's football. So I've been talking to a federation that is looking at taking the league out of the federation. WSL has done that obviously recently and was able to triple the revenue in 2 years by having people whose job it is to think about women's football every day, for a start, and by having people whose experience and expertise is aligned with the particular growth areas that women's sport needs. I think it goes back to the point that Frederique was making at the beginning, that we're talking about a different audience, but we're also talking about a sport that's in a very different stage of growth. But because of the way that football, particularly in Europe, is structured, where you have men's and women's clubs together, you have women's leagues incubated in the federation, in the governing body, you have a scenario where what's required for women's football to grow is not the same as what's required to run a men's football team. For example, I think we've talked about this, I've had this conversation a few times today, but men's football, many of these men's teams don't have to sell tickets. The tickets sell themselves. You build a stand for 10,000 with 10,000 more seats, they will sell before you've even done anything. Women's football is not like that. Women's football, you have to sell, you have to build fandom, and you have to build sustained fandom. You have to provide an experience that people want to see. People go to men's football, they really care about winning and losing. And I've had a number of conversations where people say, we don't even really watch the football anymore, but we're there because we care and we're passionate, it's tribal. You've picked that up as a kid because your parents passed it down to you. Women's football is having to attract new fans, which means you need new skills, different skills and different people running the sport. And so, yeah, I probably could go on about that, but I think that's probably enough said. I think everyone hopefully agrees that.
I agree, and I find it also interesting to see, because as what you said is like, men's football sells itself, and all of a sudden the whole organization has to sell a new product. And they are a bit like, what to do, How do we do this? Because we're used to like having queues for our season tickets, and all of a sudden we have to kind of get people to the match. So it's a completely new strategy they have to have as a club, and I think it's quite difficult for people to crack. And I think the whole organization isn't really used to doing it. So.
Yeah, and I think, and the point I think is that the women's club needs to be seen as a business on its own, and it doesn't mean that the women's club should deliver everything, or they should be entirely separate from the men's club, but it should have enough of a business to be able to run itself with a level of governance that is appropriate for the stage and for the growth needs of the sport.
And thanks for this answer. And this answer led me to give another big question to you, Frederique. So, because now we are speaking about engaging new audiences now. So, what are the marketing tools, clubs, we can say, that are essential for clubs to capture new audience, even comparing to the fact that, I don't know, I mean, I completely agree with you all when you say these are completely different new kind of supporters that is watching the games or going to the stadium, attending to the events. But if I say, I mean, if we go having like a quick question to the whole audience, how many of you going regularly to the football, to the male football games? I'm sure not. I mean, not even half of the audiences, because now you have the broadcasting TVs, and then the cost of the games is leveraging a lot for the male football. So, I mean, in 2026, it's not even like before. I mean, there is an old generation of supporters going and that is seeing still attractive going to the stadium. But the new ones that you were saying, that you were speaking before, the new generation, how we can make it attractive?
Yeah, good question. I think that's what every football club is trying to crack. I think that's code. But I think if we talk about women's football, it's kind of it's interesting, because as you see, the fans are young, and some are really young, like they are 8 to 10 years old sometimes. Hard to target because they don't have a phone or an iPad, so they use the iPad of the parents. So I think they engage with just the same as the Gen Z audience. They engage with mostly the players, maybe not always the team. I think their entry point is always a player, and then they become a fan of a team. They're not like maybe I'm grown up in a PSV family because my dad was a fan, but I don't think people will grow up in a family where they are already a Bayern Munich women's fan like 10 years ago. So you have to kind of along the way get kind of targeted by it. So I think that's a kind of a big challenge, because then you have to target the younger audience, but actually you have to maybe sometimes target even the fathers or the moms, because they buy the tickets, and they maybe have the phone, for example. So I think in that regard, and for like ticket sales, I think it's a challenge, but I think it's done mostly online. And if you look on social media, I think you should target the younger audience, the Gen Alpha, the Gen Z, but then trying to kind of make sure that they go to their parents and say, hey, can we go to a game? Because they are the ones who buy the tickets. And I then think if you're looking for more inside the game and into the stadium, there are so many different ways to engage the audience more. But I think there is generally a big problem in women's football, because either they play in like the training stadium where it's like 2,000 people can fit in, or it's a stadium with 50,000 people. So there's nothing really in between. So it's hard to have a highly engaged crowd if you're with 5,000 people in the arena, for example, here, and then have the same experience and the same feeling that maybe the men's football gives you, because you're like a full stadium, you chat with everyone, it's engaging, and now it's like half of a stands is full. So then it's more of like, you try to engage people with maybe a dancing cam sometimes, and maybe some music and stuff, but I think that's generally quite hard still to do.
Yes, thanks for the answer, Frederique. And this reminds me of one of the last trips we had in the US. We were going to see the USLS game of Brooklyn. They were playing at home, and was to me completely quite new, because of course it's a new league now. And I was, we were there for a client, so I wanted to buy a shirt of this player to keep in my house for the happiness of my wife, as you can imagine. But and I was surprised, because they were not ready to have the number and the shirt number and the name of the player, but they were having, like the press machine that they can create for you. So I was able to at least being happy with my child side of having a shirt. and which is something that is sometimes is missing, no, even here, because I mean, maybe in the US, I mean, for sure they are having a more business-oriented approach to things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's also funny because now all of a sudden those football venues have to tailor to women. I think there was a story about the World Cup in Australia where there were huge queues for coffee and I think wine or so. And they didn't have many of that because they used to sell a lot of beers. So it's also like understanding your fan and who comes to the stadium and what they want. And I think that's, yeah, it's also changing your strategy in that.
Yes, thanks, Frederique. I will come to you, Bianca, just because we were speaking on that, on the shirt side of all of these. So let's say to create a player as a brand, you always emphasize the role of a player as a role model. So have to be a sport person, have to be, not only good on the pitch, but outside. I understand. And we can say today, what's the biggest challenge you are facing to try to create this attractiveness on a player profile to also attract some international audience and new supporters?
Oh, I think that's it's a different question because I think first of all, you mentioned it. It's the young fans are mostly fan of the player and not of the club. So I remember, I think it's a good example. We got Lena Oberdorf. She was like one of the rising stars at our, from Wolfsburg at that time. We transferred her to Bayern Munich. She got 2 ACLs in a row. Didn't play, the first season didn't play no game. The second season, she played maybe 6 games or 5 games before she tore her ACL again. And then we talk about shirt numbers and we talk about selling shirts. She's next to Julia Gwynn. She's the one who's selling the most shirts. So she's not even playing for the club but she's only the personality, a brand, who is actually selling the jersey. It's not because she's the best player and she played or she had the best performance for our club. So she's really actually, it's about branding. So even when you transfer players now, you think about the football player and you think about a brand. So it's, I think it's in women's football it's a bit different compared to, let's say, to the men's football. Right now here's really it's not just the football player and the quality of the football player, it's actually we're talking about a brand as well. So especially when you talk about players in the US, for example, I think this is something you can't really compare to Europe, to the Europe model.
So you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a really interesting example because why do we assume that if a player's injured, they can't still be working? Like, why can't she be your social media correspondent? Why can't she be your commentator? Why can't she be, if that's what she's really good at and she can't play football, why can't she be doing something else that's useful for you? But we almost see in the men's game, if a player's injured, you just don't see them for 6 months and then they come back. But actually, that's a really old-fashioned view. I don't think that's very helpful when actually you should recognise you're seeing what she's actually good at and where she might be able to still drive value and then still feel engaged with the club.
Yeah, again, I think that's the point because we're using her as well. As I said, she's injured, but she's a brand and using her for interviews, using her for a match day experience for fans in front of the stadium, doing autographs. So she actually can do something for the club, which is different compared to the men's because they're more connected to the club, they're more reachable for fans. I think that's a big difference as well when we talk about marketing and sales for sponsors. To get into the women's game is such a different approach.
Yeah. And to add, maybe it's also that many fans, female fans, they really like the story behind the player, and I think that's fundamentally different from the men's sport as well. It's I think we once had the Netflix documentary of Drive to Survive, where you saw the story behind the big Formula One drivers, and women loved it, and it was because it's the story behind the athlete, and I think that is generally why certain players are so popular is because they want to know everything about that person, and they don't really care how many goals they make or if they're injured or not, because they fell in love with the values of a player or the story of the player, or I don't know, maybe you get connected because you love her fashion sense of the field, So I think that's also really interesting for clubs to tap into more. It's like the storytelling around female players as role models, because that's where your fans come in.
Thanks, Frederique and Bianca, for answering my question. Last question for you, Kirsten. Frederique was mentioning also the importance on stadiums and infrastructure. So we can say that maybe I was mentioning Brighton, that is like literally building a new stadium only for female athletes. I mean, how do you think having the right structure and facilities and stadiums as well can act as a catalyst for making this industry like on a global scale?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think it's probably one of the constraints that I didn't mention in the first question, that to actually the growth of the women's game. I think in some ways, and what we've probably seen is probably three different strategies. Strategy one is aspire to fill your men's stadium for your women's team, which Arsenal have done incredibly well. And it's not been a one-off. They've built that fan base over years. They've invested heavily in marketing, and they have created a loyal fan base. They're getting an average of 34,000 across the season, which, yes, is not a full Emirates Stadium, but it's a profitable Emirates Stadium, and that's the main thing. They're making money from ticketing. So they're running profitable matches. Strategy two is to build something that is fit for purpose and right size for the women's game. And you know, I think the Brighton Stadium is about 10 or 11,000, and that it's generally accepted somewhere between 10 and 15,000 is what clubs who are building standalone facilities are aiming for. And I think based on what's happening in the US, that's probably the right aspiration. The best averages there are around the 20,000 mark, which I think is a good aspiration. It means you can design a stadium for the audience and the fan base that you will get. You can build atmosphere and you can build excitement in that way. The third strategy is probably what most other clubs are doing, which is the hybrid. And the problem with that method is that you end up with two stadiums. It's hard to create fan habit. They don't know where they're going each week. You've got two very different experiences. You're either in a massive stadium that's not full or maybe full, and then you have this great experience, and the next week you're back to a 2,500 or a third or fourth tier stadium that is, probably not the standard that you want that club to be in. It's not good for broadcast. So I think that there's the kind of experience and your ability to build a fan base. The other side of it is commercial, and the ability for that. And the panel that was before this one talked about the importance of the stadium as a revenue generator, as a commercial growth asset. The reality is, if you own your own stadium, it gives you something to monetize, whether just for that match or outside of that too. So you have a lot more opportunity to generate revenue. You have an opportunity to generate fan habit and experience, but you also can build a local fan base around that area. I think a lot of the challenge, particularly in WSL clubs, and I don't know what it's like in Germany, but the stadiums that women's clubs are playing in are nowhere near the men's stadiums of that fan base. So if you're accepting that a number of the fan base that you might be targeting is going to be crossing over from your men's club, you're expecting them to go to a different part of the town, or they're having to drive an hour out of the city to get to the stadium, and it's not a great experience. So I think, infrastructure is critical. It's really, really difficult because not everywhere is like the US, where they've got lots of land they can build, they've got investment, and they've got clubs with really high valuations that justify and enable them to invest in infrastructure that is actually needed by those communities. The reality is most of our communities don't need more football stadiums. So it's a really hard balance, I think.
Thanks for the answer. I remember, just to add on what you were saying, I remember, we will try to run up late, 10 seconds. I remember when I went years ago, when I was living in London, to a football game of Arsenal. Now you see the results on the stadium. They were playing in Zone 6 of London, completely out of the tube. And when I came there, I was like, am I in the right place? And you see now how the path they made and how growing they are. So it's massively incredible, and they are paying also as well for going to the stadium. So that the change is not around the corner, is in front of us, I guess. By the way, you wanted to say something?
No, I agree, and I think the only thing that that they would say, and if you speak to their commercial director, is we've invested, we've spent money in marketing. If you go into London, you can see advertising that's targeted at you as a women's football fan. So they very specifically had a strategy to do this and built around it. So I think more clubs could do it if they're prepared to invest.
Completely agree. Thanks, Kirsten. And I want to thank you all. And I'm asking you a big round of applause for my panelists here. Thank you. Thank you for being here.